I was 26, a regular guy living a life that looked fine from the outside. I had a job, decent, not great. Office work, emails, reports, more emails. You know the type. Nothing glamorous, but I was good at it. I showed up on time, I hit deadlines, I said yes, more than I should have. After work, I went home, heated something from the freezer, watched whatever was trending, slept late, woke up tired. Repeat. Fridays were sacred. That was bar night with the guys. Cheap beer, pool, darts, trash talk that made us laugh like teenagers again. I didn't complain much. My rent was paid. My boss wasn't a monster. I dated now and then, nothing lasting. 7 or 8 months, max. But that felt normal. Everyone I knew was kinda floating too. If you'd asked me back then, I'd have said, yeah, life's fine. It wasn't exciting. But it was safe. Predictable. Until the day it wasn't. I don't remember falling. I remember the coffee machine whirring. I remember thinking about a report that was due yesterday. I remember someone calling my name. Then, black. Next thing I knew, I was lying in a hospital bed with something beeping near my head and something sharp in my chest. The word heart attack sounded like it belonged to someone older. My granddad. A stressed out CEO. Not me. But the doctor looked me in the eye and said it calmly, like this wasn't insane. Your body is under too much stress. You need to stop, or next time, we might not be this lucky. Lucky? I'd been running on fumes. Ignoring the weight on my chest, the shallow breaths, the headaches. Because that's what everyone does, right? You push. You grind. You survive. But what if surviving isn't really living? That question started echoing in my head, louder than the machines around me. And for the first time, I didn't want to go back. Hospitals have a strange way of making time feel thick. Like the world outside is on fast forward while you're stuck in pause. I spent 3 days in that bed. Not moving much. Not thinking clearly. Just existing in a haze of machines and medication. I remember staring at the ceiling. Plain. Off-white. Cracked in one corner. And somehow, it held more meaning than my last 6 months of life. My phone buzzed now and then. A few texts. Work emails. Some group chat notifications I didn't care about. I didn't reply to anyone. My boss wrote. Hope you're back soon. Q3's gonna be brutal. I wanted to laugh. Then cry. Then maybe scream. My heart literally stopped cooperating with life, and all they wanted was my spreadsheet for Q3. At night, when the hospital was quiet, I began to wonder. Was this all there was? Was I just going to heal up, go back to the same desk, and pretend like nothing happened? Pretend that nearly dying at 26 was just an unfortunate interruption? One nurse, Marla, she was older, kind. She noticed I barely talked. She asked one evening, while checking my phone. What did you want to be before all this? I blinked at her. I didn't know how to answer. It had been so long since I asked myself anything real. That question haunted me. What did I want to be? Back at home, nothing looked different. The dishes in the sink. The half-eaten box of cereal. The blinking light on the Wi-Fi router. My apartment was a mirror of how I lived. Functional. Safe. Dead inside. I stood in the middle of the room and said out loud, to no one. I can't go back. I didn't know what forward looked like. But I knew what back felt like. And it nearly killed me. So I made a decision. I opened my work laptop, typed a polite resignation letter. And hit send. That was the first time I'd felt free in years. And the scariest. There's a strange silence that comes after quitting a job you never liked. Not relief. Not fear. Just emptiness. For the first time in years, I didn't have anything to check in the morning. No alarms. No deadlines. No half-hearted good mornings in a Slack channel filled with passive-aggressive emojis. I sat on the couch for hours that first day. Just sat. Like my body hadn't gotten the memo that I was free. I should have felt liberated. But all I felt was weight. Like I'd stepped off a fast-moving treadmill and now had no idea how to walk. Who was I without that job? Without the busy badge? Without the daily grind that made me feel important, even when it was eating me alive? I made eggs for breakfast. Watched them overcook. Threw them out. Made coffee. Didn't drink it. I stared at my hands like they used to belong to someone who had direction. And now, they just rested in my lap, clueless. The next day, I packed a small bag. Texted my parents. Told them I was coming to visit. Dad replied with a thumbs up. Mom replied with 3 voice messages and a grocery list. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Driving out of the city felt like unzipping something tight around my chest. The buildings got smaller. The sky opened up. And the silence in my car? It felt different this time. Not empty. But full of space. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I pulled over at a gas station. Got myself a plastic-wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. The cashier said, "You on a road trip or runnin' from something?" I smiled. Little bit of both. And I meant it. I slept in my old room that night. Same posters on the walls. Same bookshelf, a little dustier. My mom had changed the bed sheets but left my high school hoodie hanging behind the door, like a memory frozen in place. It was strange, comforting. Like stepping back into a version of me I'd forgotten. In the morning, I made coffee and sat outside with my dad. We didn't talk much. We rarely did. But just sitting there, hearing the wind in the trees and the rustle of the old dog under the porch, it felt like medicine. Not loud. Not bright. But necessary. Quietly healing. The morning sun hit the window just right, slicing through the dusty glass and painting the kitchen in gold. I stood barefoot on the cold tiles, holding a cup of coffee that I wasn't drinking. It was quiet, too quiet. My mom was out back watering her tomatoes, and my dad had already left for his usual route through town. I hadn't planned on staying long. But something about being here, the smells, the stillness, the creaking old floorboards, pulled at me like gravity. After breakfast, I wandered into the garage. It hadn't changed. Same shelves. Same paint-stained rags. Same stubborn lawnmower that probably hadn't run since 2014. I wasn't looking for anything. Just killing time. But then I saw it. On the top shelf, under an old tarp, buried beneath a box of Christmas lights, was something that made my chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition. My old workbench. I had built it with my dad when I was maybe 12 or 13. The surface was scratched to hell, but I knew every mark. Every burn. Every spot of dried glue. I ran my fingers across it like it was a photograph. That thing had history. It had meaning. I remembered sitting there for hours, sketching, measuring, cutting. I used to want to design things, real things. Products. Objects that made people's lives easier or cooler or cleaner. I even applied to industrial design school once. Never went. Life had other ideas. Jobs. Rent. Real life. I stepped back, staring at that dusty table like it was a message from the past. What if I wasn't done with that dream? What if I just pressed resume? I spent the rest of the day cleaning out the garage. Swept the floor. Tossed out boxes of junk. Opened the windows. My mom walked in, raised her eyebrows, and asked, "What are you doing?" I didn't have a full answer. Reclaiming something, I said. She didn't press. Just brought me lemonade and left the door open. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning I woke up sore, dusty, and oddly fulfilled. My hands ached, my back protested, but my head felt clear for the first time in months. I made coffee, this time actually drinking it, and stood in the garage doorway staring at the clean, open space like I'd built something monumental. It wasn't much, just a garage with some junk moved around. But it was mine again. I went into town that afternoon. Walked the aisles of the hardware store. Smelled the sawdust, touched the tool handles like they were old friends. I didn't buy anything that day. But I knew I would soon. Later, I found my old sketchbook buried in a box of childhood memories. Flipping through the pages felt like visiting someone I used to know, someone bold, creative, kind of chaotic. There were designs for chairs, shelves, lamps, strange little inventions that probably wouldn't work but looked damn cool. One page had a scrawled note in the corner, "Build something that matters, even if it's just to you." I stared at that for a long time. I wasn't sure who I was when I wrote it. But I knew who I was now. And I wasn't going back to spreadsheets. That night, I opened my laptop for the first time since quitting. Not for emails or job listings, no. I looked up small business licenses. Prototyping software. Local maker spaces. I started scribbling ideas again. My fingers remembered the rhythm. It felt like plugging back into a circuit that had always been there, just dusty. My parents noticed the shift. My mom stopped asking when I'd go back to the city. My dad came to the garage and stood silently while I measured wood. He didn't say much, but I caught him smiling once when he thought I wasn't looking. I wasn't building anything groundbreaking. But I was building. And for the first time, that was enough. A week passed like a blur. Coffee. Sawdust. Scribbles. Sleep. Repeat. And I loved it. I didn't need a grand plan yet. I just needed momentum. Something real to hold on to. Something that felt like it came from me, not from a job title or someone else's expectations. One evening, while I was sanding down a rough board, my mom leaned against the doorframe with a soft look on her face. "You look more like yourself lately," she said. I paused, brush in hand. "I feel more like myself," I answered. And for once, I meant every word. One of the strangest things about change is how quiet it can be. There's no thunderclap, no spotlight moment. Just a series of tiny choices you don't even realize are changing you until suddenly, you're someone new. By week 2, I had a basic prototype of a small desk lamp, nothing fancy, just wood, copper piping, and a warm LED bulb. But when I turned it on that night, the glow that filled the garage felt like a sunrise. I wasn't building the next iPhone. I wasn't disrupting an industry. But I was creating. With my hands. From my head. That was more than enough. I posted a picture of the lamp on a design subreddit. Didn't expect much. Within a day, it had over 1,000 upvotes. Dozens of comments. People asking if I was selling it, what the dimensions were, what tools I'd used. For a second, I felt like a fraud. I had no business. No plan. Just a bench and a dream I'd left for dead a decade ago. But then someone wrote, "This feels like it was made by a human, not a factory." I'd buy this in a heartbeat. That hit me. Deep. I made a simple website that weekend. Just a single page with a photo of the lamp and a contact form. I called it Stillhouse Studio. The name came from my dad's whiskey shed out back, quiet, sturdy, always producing something slow and real. Orders didn't flood in, but a few emails trickled. A teacher in Oregon. A photographer in Montreal. A woman who wanted one for her reading nook in Vermont. I built each one by hand, packaged them myself, wrote a thank you note on paper that smelled like sawdust and coffee. I wasn't chasing scale. I was chasing soul. And for the first time in a long time, people weren't just noticing me, they were connecting with something I made. My parents watched it unfold without interfering. Just small nods, quiet smiles, my mom placing snacks in the garage like it was an unspoken blessing. I wasn't making much money. But every time I lit one of those lamps before boxing it up, I felt like I was sending a part of myself out into the world. Something real. Something warm. Something mine. It had been about 3 months since I first dusted off the workbench, and somewhere in the mess of coffee cups, late nights, and sawdust, I realized I hadn't thought about my old job in weeks. I couldn't remember the last time I checked my LinkedIn. My calendar was no longer a grid of deadlines, it was a sketchbook full of ideas. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I was alive in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid in the back of the garage with a pencil behind my ear and glue on my fingers. Orders came in slow and steady. Lamps, a few shelves, even a custom desk for someone who wrote poetry full-time and wanted something that felt like it had soul. I didn't need a factory. Just my hands and enough light to keep going. Then one evening, just after I had finished polishing a new piece, my dad walked in and handed me a folded piece of paper. "Came for you," he said. It was a letter. From a local business group. Apparently someone had submitted my site to a small entrepreneur grant competition. I had no idea who. But I was selected as a finalist. They wanted to meet me. I was stunned. Not because I didn't believe in what I was doing, but because I had never thought anyone else would take it seriously. The meeting was in the city. Back where I came from. I almost didn't go. But that Saturday, I packed the lamp I was most proud of, printed a few photos, and drove back through the streets that used to feel like home and now just felt distant. The office was sleek, glass walls and echoing floors. People in suits. Clipboards. Polite smiles. I walked in with jeans and wood dust under my nails. The panel asked questions. I answered honestly. I told them about quitting. About the heart attack. About building things by hand because it made me feel human again. And for once, I didn't try to sound impressive. I just told the truth. A week later, I got the email, I won the grant. It wasn't a huge amount. But enough to buy better tools, rent a real workspace, maybe hire someone part-time. It wasn't just the money. It was that someone looked at what I made and said, "This matters." And that was everything. It's been 8 years. Stillhouse Studio isn't a garage anymore. It's a real space now, white walls, tall windows, the scent of cedar in the air. We've got a team of 5, a waiting list for custom pieces, and shelves that ship all over the country. But some things haven't changed. I still sand the final layer on every lamp. I still handwrite thank you notes. I still wear the same old hoodie on cold mornings, the one my mom saved behind the door all those years ago. My parents retired 2 years back. They moved closer, actually. My dad drops by every week just to check the grain, and my mom still leaves snacks in the break room like she owns the place. The garage back home? Still there. Still mine. Not for building anymore, but for remembering. 5 years ago, a woman walked into our studio for a consultation. She needed help designing a small bookcase for her classroom. She stayed for coffee. Then lunch. Then weekends. Now she's my wife. We've got 2 kids, a scruffy dog, and a house with creaky stairs and hand-built furniture. Life's not perfect. It's messy. Loud. Exhausting. But it's ours. And it's real. Some nights, after the kids are asleep and the tools are quiet, I sit by the window and think about that moment in the hospital. 26. Scared, strapped to machines. The pain in my chest, the blur of fluorescent lights. And I remember how that version of me thought his life was already locked in place. That all he had left was stress and the slow crawl toward burnout. He had no idea what waited outside that job. That garage. That dusty old dream. So if you're reading this, wherever you are, whatever you've convinced yourself is too late to change, I just want to say, it's not. The unknown isn't something to fear. It's something to meet. Head on. With dust on your hands and hope in your chest. Build something that matters. Even if it's just to you. Especially if it's just to you.